Hello there my dear friends, and welcome back to another Star Wars video. It is I coming at you once again, your friend and your favourite galactic hostess, Star Wars Meg. And today, we've got some pretty big Star Wars updates. We're going to be talking about a developing situation with Star Wars animation, but first, Disney might have just revealed when we're getting our first trailer for Ahsoka Season 2. According to Disney+, it is a 2026 release, and this has led Star Wars fans to speculate it's going to be a winter release, or at the very earliest, a fall 2026 release. Well, Disney just unveiled the dates for D23, and the entertainment showcase where Lucasfilm has a panel is August 14th. This mirrors the panel from 2024, where they unveiled the first trailer for Skeleton Crew. So if they're following a similar trajectory to a couple of years ago, I don't expect Ahsoka until the end of the year. And I'll be honest guys, and this is a pretty major prediction, but I don't think Ahsoka's second season is going to be the only focus of the Lucasfilm showcase. I reckon we're going to get our first look at Star Wars Starfighter coming in 2027, because it never is just one project. At the last showcase, we didn't just get Skeleton Crew, but also our first look at Andor's final season, which didn't come out until the following spring, although it wasn't public. So maybe they're going to do something similar this time with the next show coming out, and then a teaser for the year ahead, which as we know is Star Wars Starfighter and A New Hope's 50th anniversary. I'd be very surprised if there was nothing for the film. So we could be in for a few very big surprises this summer. I've seen a few predictions where people said Ahsoka's going to come before the winter, but I very much doubt it. Lucasfilm has a lot of priorities before then. We have more Shadow Lord, but more importantly, the Mandalorian and Grogu. And I'm sure they don't want anything overshadowing the first Star Wars movie in 7 years. So I wouldn't expect Ahsoka until later in the year. I don't think it's going to be pushed to 2027, but it won't be before the late fall or early winter. And speaking of Ahsoka, my friends, we have a newly shared bit of concept art for a Loth cat. It's probably for Merle, Sabine's cat back in the known galaxy. And notice, he has a new pendant, a new collar. Is Ezra looking after him? Either way, just a small tidbit there. But moving on my friends to some more Star Wars news, this is a big one. Lucasfilm producer Henry Gilroy has once again been calling out Disney. This is someone who was a writer and producer on both the Clone Wars and Rebels, and he's someone who's very defensive of the Star Wars brand. And I'm not just talking about Disney Star Wars per se, I'm talking about general Star Wars storytelling. He cares about the themes, the writing, and the characters. He's a rare breed of creative that won't just bend the knee for their employer. He's been notorious for calling out certain creative choices. He's not afraid to say when something just doesn't work, or certain decisions are just plain stupid. And I don't know if you remember this, and it feels like a fever dream just recalling it, but Gilroy famously dissuaded Disney from having Ezra Bridger ride Chopper like he's a freaking skateboard. I'm not even joking, but Gilroy put his foot down and said, "You're not gonna do that. He's not an object, and you have to respect the characters." That's why he was so frustrated when Dave Filoni made Sabine Wren a Jedi. He was so confused. He couldn't understand why in the Ahsoka show, Dave Filoni made Sabine Wren Force sensitive and a Jedi. Well, today my friends, Henry Gilroy is once again spilling some beans. Making an appearance on Pod of Rebellion podcast, Gilroy pulls the curtain back on the difference between working under George Lucas and working for Disney. Here's what he said. When you're working on Clone Wars, you have one boss. You only have to please one guy really, and that's George Lucas. If he likes it, then he's going to add stuff and do his own stuff to it. But then he goes on to compare this process to the creation of Star Wars Rebels. He says, quote, "There's the committees. So not only are you getting notes from Lucasfilm Story Group about what they're doing for future movies, but you're also getting notes from the Disney team." Then he says, you also have the studio and the Disney Channel. So it's very corporate. It's very different than appeasing one man, someone who always put the creative vision first, before profitability, and even before the audience. And so with the Clone Wars, which was something very sacred to him, and I guess still is, the animators, the producers, they had to appease him, George Lucas. He's the person who had the final say. But with Rebels, it was an approval process by committee, which is pretty darn insane, considering how amazing Rebels turned out. And that's the next thing Gilroy mentions. He says this. So you go from pleasing one guy to now there's 5 different entities. When you get notes back on a script, they're color-coded. Red is for this person, blue is for that person, green is for this, so it's a lot of things you're having to juggle. So I'm always amazed by how good the series turned out, but a lot of it had to do with us just standing our ground and the trust that was earned during the Clone Wars. And that's another thing, it was creatives like Gilroy, like Dave Filoni at the time, who really carried the heart of the show. And like he said, they had to stand their ground sometimes, disagree with others at Lucasfilm, disagree with Disney, the executives, and just say, look, we worked on the Clone Wars, we got advice directly from George Lucas, we know what Star Wars animation is supposed to be, and I guess, in many instances, it's amazing they won their case, and they were listened to. And then Gilroy goes on to explain another hurdle, which was the budget. The Rebels budget was half of what the Clone Wars was, because I think, even in the cancelling of the Clone Wars, the studio was like, we have enough episodes, it's serving its licensing life, we're probably not going to be able to milk more, and it's expensive. And then of course, when it got cancelled, people were freaking out, which is why Netflix was like, oh, it's worth it for us to do another season. So that's the one thing, the budget. But before the Clone Wars saw a huge resurgence, in 2014, Disney saw Rebels as a risk, so they were cautious with the funding. And Star Wars Rebels and its characters have had a second life, thanks to the Mandoverse, but at the time, the show wasn't huge. I remember there were some viral moments, especially in the last 2 seasons, and the social media outlets and the YouTube channels were kind of keeping those relevant, but generally, it always received criticism for being less brutal than the Clone Wars. And another thing was the animation style, which did put quite a few fans off, especially the thin pointy lightsabers. Some people love them, some people don't. But you know, history repeats itself, because many adult fans in the 2000s similarly didn't see the appeal of the 3D Clone Wars show. People forget how hated that series was, especially Ahsoka. Rebels, in my book, is the superior series of all Star Wars animation, but I'm still also a huge fan of the Clone Wars. Not all of it. I have issues with certain characters, especially Dooku in the Clone Wars, but I do love so much of it, especially Season 6, and I'm an even bigger fan of the Bad Batch. But I think what Gilroy's really trying to highlight isn't a lack of quality with the Disney projects, but rather how important it is to have creatives who care about what George built, the foundations of Star Wars. Because without that input and pushback, the situation with Star Wars Rebels could have turned out very differently. Disney execs don't always know what's best, especially with an IP like Star Wars, which is very distinct and cannot be caricatured. You can't just Disneyfy it. And sometimes I get flack for saying this, but I stand by my word. Star Wars needs to always stay true to its mythic roots, even if it diversifies into other genres. You can't break the core of what Lucas created, and when you do, when you redefine the classic tropes of good and evil, or what a Jedi is, what the dark side constitutes, that's when you get stories that just don't feel like they're part of the Star Wars saga. I've seen people try to make the arguments that Andor and Skeleton Crew are in that category, but I disagree. They're very different kinds of Star Wars stories, but they don't deviate from George's message. But those are Henry Gilroy's latest comments, my friends. What do you think? And what do you make of everything we spoke about in this video? Share your thoughts in the comments down below, my friends. And if you enjoyed this one, please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you next time. May the Force be with you, always.